Hi, strangers. This is part 2 of the Columbus Poltergeist, otherwise known as the story of Tina Resch. So if you haven't listened to episode 1 yet, please do so now. In part 1, I left you with 2 questions about Tina Resch. 1. Did Tina really possess telekinetic powers? And the other, did she kill her 3-year-old daughter Amber? 2 massive mysteries. Let's start with the first one. When Tina Resch was 14, living in Columbus, Ohio, with her adoptive parents, she started experiencing alleged paranormal activity in her home. The media wanted to believe that a poltergeist had attached itself to Tina, just like the famous film that had taken America by storm 2 years prior, while parapsychologists believed she had uncontrolled telekinetic powers. In part 1, we examined the paranormal portion of Tina's story from the lens of a believer. I told you the story of what the Resch family alleged happened, and William Roll and Mike Harding's account of their interactions with Tina. But for part 2, I want to take a more skeptical look at this case. When the media circus descended on Columbus, Ohio, in 1984 to get a peek at the poltergeist girl, only a few were allowed in the Resch home. Joan trusted Columbus Dispatch reporter Mike Harding, so when he brought William Roll, a parapsychologist, she let him in. One person she did not let interview the family was celebrity magician James Randi. Because he was a magician, Joan felt like he would cheapen the story. But the truth was that James Randi was set on taking the most objective view out of everyone. Randi wasn't the first magician to try and debunk someone who was claiming to have psychic power. Harry Houdini very famously debunked many supposed psychics during the wave of spiritualism in the 1920s. James Randi, as well as Houdini, saw themselves as very different from someone claiming paranormal powers. In the 2014 documentary An Honest Liar, directed by Tyler Measom and Justin Weinstein, Randi was quoted as saying the following: "People who are stealing money from the public, cheating them and misinforming them, that's the kind of thing that I've been fighting all my life. Magicians are the most honest people in the world. They tell you they're going to fool you, and then they do it." James Randi believed Tina was faking the poltergeist activity in her home in a desperate attempt to gain her parents' attention in a house full of other children. He believed she was tricking them by making it seem as though objects in the house were moving on their own, when she was really moving them. Randi believed that Mike Harding's story in the Columbus Dispatch was written not to help the Reschs, but was to try to sell papers. Remember the infamous photo Columbus Dispatch photographer Fred Shannon took of the phone floating in front of Tina? Well, according to an interview Randi did with the Skeptic podcast, Randi and his team allegedly got a hold of Fred Shannon's negatives from that day, and in the photos leading up to the one that was published, you can see Tina grabbing and throwing the phone. There was also a televised interview in which Tina is very clearly seen shaking a lamp by throwing her arms out. Tina's story was called fraudulent by many after that footage premiered. Randi also accused parapsychologist William Roll of indulging in Tina's behavior in order to write a book about his experience with her. Randi believes that this indulgence inevitably led to the death of Tina's 3-year-old daughter. According to Randi, she was led to believe that she could get away with anything, even the abuse of her daughter. Lock your doors and listen closely. This is Stranger in the House. On April 14th, 1992, 3-year-old Amber Bennett was declared dead at a Georgia hospital. According to the doctors, she had died from blunt force trauma to the head and was covered in bruises. Shortly after her death, the hospital called the local police. Amber's mother, Tina Resch, and her boyfriend, David Henning, were brought into the station for questioning. When they arrived at the station, David and Tina were immediately ushered into separate rooms. At around 10 p.m., a detective sat down with Tina and began questioning her about her life with Amber. There are no video or audio recordings of this interview. The detective apparently only took handwritten notes. What we do know for sure is that the interview lasted 11 hours. According to Tina, she asked the detective multiple times if she needed an attorney and was told she did not. The detective questioned her about her daughter's bruises, and Tina explained that, like her, Amber was clumsy and David didn't always keep a close enough eye on her when he was babysitting. Tina said that the bruises and head injury Amber suffered before she died was due to a fall down the stairs that happened the day before. The detective then asked her whether she believed David had been molesting Amber. She told them she didn't believe he would do that. According to Tina, the police questioned her about her and David's sex life, attempting to insinuate that they were some sort of sexual deviants who would involve Amber in their sexual encounters. They also told Tina that they believed David had killed her daughter and she was trying to protect him. In a separate room, 3 detectives and a representative from the Department of Children and Family Services were questioning David. Unlike Tina's interrogation, David's was taped and transcribed. Police asked both David and Tina that if Amber wasn't being abused and she had just fallen down the stairs like they said, why didn't they just take Amber to the hospital if the fall was that bad? David and Tina blamed each other for this. David told police that Tina had been worried that the hospital would call the Department of Family and Children's Services if they saw the bruises and would take Amber away. In the other room, Tina allegedly said it was David who said the hospital would report them to Child Services. Throughout both interviews, the detectives insisted that Amber had been sexually assaulted. This apparently was based on word of mouth from the hospital staff, but Amber's autopsy later revealed there had been no signs of sexual abuse. The detectives kept implying that if David confessed to the sexual assault, he would get a more lenient sentence and Tina would be given the murder charge for leaving her daughter with him. Eventually, David did confess to the sexual assault, but based on the transcript, many believed he was coerced into making that confession. This theory is also supported by the fact that Amber had no evidence of any sexual abuse. And at the end of the interview, David insisted that he did not sexually assault her once more. While these interviews were going on, officers were searching both David's trailer home where Amber died and Tina's apartment. In the trash cans at David's trailer, police found bloody tissues, which matched Amber's blood type. According to David, the tissues were from when Amber reopened a cut in her mouth on the day of her death. This story was supported by Amber's autopsy. She had cuts in her mouth, one on the inside of her upper lip, which showed evidence of healing, and one on the inside of her lower lip that was newer. There was a belt found in Tina's apartment that police believed Amber could have been beaten with, but there was no evidence that had happened. Now, after the apartment was searched and Tina had been questioned for 11 hours, police let her go home and change her clothes. Tina then returned to the station where she was finally read her Miranda rights and was arrested for the murder of her 3-year-old daughter. The Carrollton, Georgia police ultimately charged both David and Tina with aggravated battery and cruelty to children. If found guilty, Tina would potentially face the electric chair. Police couldn't say who had struck the fatal blow to Amber's head, but they believed both were equally guilty in their abuse towards her. Before the trials, police gathered over 42 statements from friends and acquaintances of Tina and David, and reviews of Tina's mothering were mixed. People like William Roll and Janine Lange told police she was a great mother, but there were a couple of official reports of abuse that did not help Tina's case. Remember Tina's abusive first husband, James Bennett? Well, when they were separated, but not yet divorced, James filed numerous child abuse reports against Tina. Now, while this doesn't look good, Child Services in Ohio did investigate all of James Bennett's claims against Tina, and all of them were deemed unsubstantiated. Police also uncovered another formal child abuse report by an Ohio nurse. During a visit to the emergency room in Ohio, a nurse believed she saw evidence of intentional burns on baby Amber, and believed that Tina had intentionally inflicted them. The nurse had filed the report to the FCC, but then a doctor at the hospital investigated the burns and discovered that Amber actually had a staph infection. Apparently, Tina had used the wrong kind of ointment on Amber's diaper rash, and it turned into a staph infection. The doctor didn't believe Tina had done this intentionally, but he was concerned that Tina didn't have the ability to take care of Amber. Remember, Tina was a teenage single mother and a runaway. She had very little money or support in Ohio. Tina and David's trials were held in the fall of 1994, and unfortunately, Tina was never going to get an unbiased jury. Her paranormal history resurfaced as the story of her daughter's death broke. The trial became a media circus. Tina was known as the psychokinetic killer mom. Despite Amber dying in David's trailer before Tina arrived home, David didn't get villainized the way Tina did. And that's probably because, in addition to Tina's wild paranormal history, she was the only one truly responsible for Amber. She left her daughter with her boyfriend almost every day so she can work with Janine Lange, one of the people who greatly indulged her in her paranormal history. Her daughter would be covered in bruises all the time because she was allegedly clumsy, and David didn't watch her closely enough, and yet she kept her in his care. Tina could not afford a legal team, so she was assigned 3 public defenders. According to Tina, none of them met with her to discuss her defense. She was eventually assigned a private attorney named James Dodd Barry, who was known to save his clients from the electric chair. During her trial, which began on October 21, 1994, the medical examiner testified that it was not impossible that Amber could have sustained the fatal blow the morning of April 14th, before Tina left Amber alone with David and then died in the afternoon. This suggested that either Tina or David could have hit Amber hard enough to eventually kill her. According to the examiner, Amber would have acted normal after the blow and then become increasingly tired. Tina's attorney knew right away that Tina was not going to get a fair trial. He knew the jury was biased against her because of her past, and despite the lack of any physical evidence suggesting that she had been the one to hit her daughter, or that her daughter's death even resulted from a physical blow from one of the adults, she was guilty in their eyes. It was her attorney's job to keep Tina from the electric chair, so he had her do the one thing that he knew would keep her alive. He had her submit an Alford plea. The Alford plea is technically a guilty plea. It's when the defendant acknowledges that there is too much evidence against them and accepts punishment from the state, but maintains that they're innocent. This plea can protect a defendant from the death penalty. On October 23, 1994, Tina turned 25 years old. The next day, she was sentenced to life in prison, plus 20 years. She was sentenced with the possibility of parole because of the Alford plea. David Herring's trial started that spring. Tina testified to her version of events during the trial, but David's defense attorney mocked her paranormal past and painted her as Amber's abuser. 6 witnesses, including David, testified that they had at some point seen Tina slap or drag Amber by the hair. In the end, David was sentenced to 20 years in prison for cruelty to children for failing to take Amber to the hospital in the days leading up to her death. In 1999, Christina filed a petition for habeas corpus, but because there was no new evidence in her case, her petition was denied. All of her applications for parole have also been denied. David Herring was released from Dooley State Prison on November 16, 2011. In 2004, William Roll released his book, Unleashed, of poltergeists and murder, the curious story of Tina Resch. The book claims Tina did in fact possess telekinetic powers and is innocent in the death of Amber. To this day, Tina Resch remains in prison. Here is an interview she did in 2019 from Pulaski State Prison.
When I found out I was pregnant with Amber, I had an eating disorder. And really, at that point, I wasn't being treated for mental health. I was horribly depressed. So finding out that I had a baby didn't depress me. It actually saved my life because I would have killed myself probably at that point had it not been for my child. I wanted her more than anything in the world, and I didn't want to give her up because I didn't want her to grow up like I did, thinking that, well, what's wrong with me, the reason my parents didn't love me. And so I figured with Amber, we may not have much, but at least she would know that I loved her and that she was mine and that I wanted her. Now, in hindsight, I feel like how incredibly selfish I was, that I should have given her up. And she would probably be alive today if I had, but I wanted her so bad. And I miss her so much.
Here's the thing. I do think Tina was selfish. I think she did not have the means to take care of her daughter, but she kept her anyway. So yes, I think Tina was not a great mother to Amber, but I also think there is too much reasonable doubt in this case for Tina to still be in prison. She never had a fair chance with her paranormal history. In recent years, Tina has gained support outside prison. 3 former Georgetown University students who began taking a closer look at Tina's case refer to themselves as Team Tina.
We knocked on doors, we spoke with members of the community, we spoke with key witnesses, we spoke with the investigators.
Looking at this 14-year-old kid who's gone through trauma already, and then suddenly there's all this attention on her. There's priests and there's reporters, and she grabbed onto that because what child wouldn't?
The investigation into Christina was more focused on the circumstances around Christina and how she was as a mother, and not about the actual facts of the case.
We've known her for 4 years at this point, and she's maintained the same story for 32 years.
They created a website called ChristinaBoyer.com and have a petition on change.org. I will link both in the show notes. According to the website they created, when Christina leaves prison, the first thing she wants to do is lay flowers on Amber's grave. Stay safe, strangers. And thanks for listening. This episode was written by Alexa Morrissey. Stranger in the House is a Boy Wonder production. All our sources will be listed in the show notes.